Welcome back, students. Today we're going to be talking about Redstone Clocks and a few other things about the comparator. In the back here, I have this Redstone torch clock, which is a great example of a Redstone clock because what they are circuits that output a pulse at specific intervals, forever. The Redstone torch clock consists of torches and redstone. What it does is it has a torch outputting redstone into a block with a torch on it. And what that does is when this is on, this turns off. And then when this is off, this turns on. This is on, so that turns off. And it keeps repeating itself. And since this is an odd number, they will never reach agreement. Because if it was an even number, it would basically be an RS NOR latch, like we talked about in the last video. Let's go to a lab so we can talk about more interesting redstone clocks. Now that we are in the lab, I have built a few more clocks. First, we will start with the random short generator, or the torch burnout clock, because, well, these redstone torches are burning out. Now, we have not discussed this, and we will right now. What happens is when this torch is turning on and off, once it turns on, it powers this block, which powers this redstone, which powers this block that's on, turning back off. And then it just loops like that. And after enough times, it just burns out, where it stays off for a few seconds. What this does is it has multiple torches, so when one burns out, the other one picks up on the slack. And then we have a repeater output. Now in order to turn this thing off, all you have to do is power the redstone. And once it's unpowered, it spams again. Now we have the repeater clocks. This one is just like that one, except it has two repeaters. It's a bit more tricky to start up, because you need to send a one-tick pulse into here. And then once you do that, it goes on forever. In order to turn it off, you have to basically break the redstone, or somehow unpower that. This is just like this one, except longer delays, so it's a longer interval. And then this one has very long intervals. But it's not the most efficient way to make a clock that turns on with long delays. In order to demonstrate how we turn this thing on and off, what we have is a piston with a block on it, or a sticky piston with a block on it. What it does is when it pushes the block in, this repeater hard powers the block and powers redstone, keeping the clock going. But as soon as the block's not there, it powers nothing, stopping the clock. And in order to start the clock, we need a one-tick pulse, which is created by updating the observer with this lever to demonstrate. And then this will show how fast a one-tick pulse is. Yeah, very noisy and annoying. But if you put arrows in here, it can be a very dangerous weapon. Speaking from experience. Before we move on to the next clock, we need to review something about comparators. So as we all know, comparators take the block state it is measuring and outputs a redstone signal based on whatever state it's in. And for lecterns, it's what page it's on. But what we haven't reviewed is that comparators can compare redstone signals. So, its first mode is compare mode, like in the name, comparators. What it does is it takes this signal, and if it's more than this one, it will turn this one off. Only if it's more. Because if it's the same, because we have a strength of 9 here, it will still output a signal strength of 9. It will always output whatever this is if this is less. And if this is more, it will always output 0. But it has a second mode called subtract mode, where it takes these two strings and outputs the difference between the two. So we have 9 here and 4 here. So 9 minus 4 equals 5, as we all know. And it outputs signal strength of 5. This is the redstone circuit I was talking about. So this clock requires one comparator, 3 dust, and a repeater. So what it's doing is Once I turn this lever on, it'll output a strong strength, and then it will run into itself, and since it's in subtract mode, it will subtract that from 15. Keep doing that forever until this turns back off, like so. Now, you cannot use this to output there, because this is the only redstone dust that is actually turning on and off. These are just going from high signal strength to low signal strength, so it won't be a clock with that. So you must output it from this dust, because outputs from these two will do nothing. Now we move on to unit 5.8, which is basically more clocks. First, we'll look at the hopper clock, which is very simple. Two hoppers running into each other. As we all know, hoppers push and pull items from each other. So, what this does is it has an item cycling back and forth between two, and this comparator measures it when it's in this hopper. And when it comes in this hopper, turns it on. When it goes out of the hopper, turns it off. And it just keeps going back and forth, creating this pulsating clock. And now we are back in the lab. First, we will talk about the Ethonian hopper clock, or Etho hopper clock for short. Then we will talk about a despawning clock, because this is very interesting. So is this. So this one is basically for long delays or long intervals, because what it does is it cycles a bunch of items through these two hoppers, and every time all the items end on one side, the redstone block is shifted. So what this is doing is this redstone block is powering this hopper, locking it, and then this hopper is pushing items into this one, but this cannot push the items back because it's being locked. And now once all the items go into here, this will no longer be powering this piston, which then will retract, having this piston extend. And it keeps doing that back and forth forever, unless one side is powered, and then it will just eventually, hold on, let's do it here. If we do it here, it will stay in this state forever until it is unpowered. We can take an output through this by simply a repeater and then take that wherever you want. And then we can also extend how long it takes. So for the longest one, we can have 5 stacks, and that takes a long time. Now we move on to the despawning clock. This is a very interesting one because it uses despawning mechanics, where an item, when it's left out for 5 minutes, it will just despawn and go away forever. So in order to demonstrate that without waiting 5 minutes, I'll just go next to it. And then when it does that, this pressure plate will no longer be pressed down, activating this torch, making this drop out more redstone. Finally, we move on to observer unit. First, we'll start with the simplest observer clock, the 1-tick clock again. We've seen many 1-tick clocks, but this is one of the simplest, because all you have to do is move observer so they're both facing each other, because each time they receive an update, they basically change block state, and then this measures that, and then they just keep going back and forth, creating this rapid pulse. Now we have one interesting one. This is a growth update one. What this does is cactus growth, or plant growth in general, is random. So we really don't know when this is going to grow, which is the whole point of the clock. Because when this thing grows up, it will automatically break since it's cactus, but it'll send a block update, and then you can take that and do whatever you want. So you could really mess around with people in that, because you could have it play a sound, you could have it drop items somewhere, you could do whatever you want. And the thing is, it's completely random. So the person you're pranking will have no idea when it will happen next. So that's what you can do with observers. And another reason why observers have their own unit. I will quickly show you how to build one of the more complex redstone clocks, which is the Ethodian hopper clock, or Etho hop clock. Now, first, you need two hoppers facing each other. So, there we go. And then we want to take an output from each hopper, run into a block, and now we have a little bit of flexibility in building. So we can either put pistons on the side like this, or we can put pistons on the top, depending on space. Redstone block on there, two redstone dust going into the pistons, and then all you need now is a stack of something, or however long you want it to be. And that's how you make it. Then you, like I said before, you could either take an output out of the redstone block, you could have an observer updating it. We move on to extra credit, where what I want you to do, like usual, is create something using the machines we learned today, or circuits. So I have a few examples here of things that you could make, and something just to give you ideas. For one, the random growth update clock connected to this dropper, which will drop redstone at random points of the day. This is a very useful contraption, actually, unlike, say, that, because what it does is if you put items into this dropper, it will dispense them into fire, and it'll only do that when there's things in the dropper, else it would be making a ton of noise, and that wouldn't be nice. So if we put this in here, oh, it dispenses it all into the fire, because what it has is the observer clock here, because this powers this piston when there's things in here. Piston pushes the two observers together, creating a fast clock. Finally, we have, this is a good example of how to use one of these etho hop clocks. Say you have this sign that lights up like that, but since you're on like a server or something, you don't want to cause a ton of lag, so you only want it to light up every once in a while. So in order to get your logo to only light up every once in a while, you create one of these, and every time it shifts back and forth, it updates this observer line, which we'll talk about later, and then creates a nice wave pattern. Good class today. I hope you learned a lot about clocks. I'm glad that you spent your time to hear me talk about all these redstone clocks, and hopefully you can find some uses for these clocks as well. They're especially useful in minigames. I can speak from experience there. So, I hope to see you next episode, and class is dismissed.